Hi, welcome back to Year 8 English. In this lesson, we'll be continuing with our study of Dracula. So in the previous lessons, we got a bit of a deep understanding of what makes Gothic literature and film Gothic. So we looked at the different characteristics of Gothic literature, that being dark and gloomy settings, the incorporation of monsters, hauntings, isolated and remote places, and the list goes on. We've also read chapters 1 and 2 of Bram Stoker's Dracula. In chapters 1 and 2, we got an insight into Jonathan's journey to Castle Dracula. So the people he encountered along the way, the animals he encountered on the way, what Romania's landscape, physical landscape is like. We also got a great description of what the castle looks like and Jonathan's first encounter with Dracula. With that knowledge of Jonathan's first encounter, we also got a highly descriptive piece of information about what Dracula looks like. So he's pale and he has long fingernails and fangs. We also got an insight into the use of language in this piece of Gothic literature. So it's highly emotive and it's highly descriptive. So based on the knowledge that we already know about Dracula and the main characters in the novel and the movie, we will be writing a letter to Mina from Jonathan. So you will be Jonathan and you'll be writing a letter back to Mina, your partner, who's back in England. And you will be detailing all of the experiences that you have encountered so far on your journey. So like I spoke about before, it's going to be your journey to Castle Dracula. What happened when you got there? What happened when you encountered Dracula himself? You also need to detail how you're feeling. So like Bram Stoker did in the novel, you need to include highly emotive language in your letter. So describe how you're feeling. Are you frightened? Are you curious? Do you want to know what happens next? And also, it needs to contain highly descriptive language. So in the letter, you want to be able to describe to Mina what this experience has been like for you. So you need to say, maybe the castle was dark and mysterious. Dracula was mysterious and pale. It's important to incorporate the use of emotive and descriptive language because it portrays how the author is feeling, okay? There is on your Google Classroom, so your digital database, there is a table there with a range of literary techniques. And there's the definition for emotive and descriptive language on there and examples of how to use them in your writing. So that is there at your disposal. Make sure you refer to it when you're writing so you can create a well-informed and intriguing piece of writing, okay? So this will be an individual task. So make sure you write the whole letter individually. But then when you're finished, swap with a partner and proofread what your partner has written. So keep an eye out for grammatical errors, issues with punctuation. Maybe make some recommendations of other language they can use if they've used a basic term, okay? So there is a template on your Google Classroom that looks something like this. So it's a table. It will outline the different aspects that you'll need to incorporate into your letter. So it starts with, the first one will be the introduction to the letter and addressing Mina. So it informs you how to set out a letter. So it says, to my dearest Mina, I wrote to you as soon as I could, ... You need to continue on from that sentence. Okay, and it includes your journey to the castle, arriving to the castle, meeting the count. So this template is on your Google Classroom. I want this done digitally, please. And if you feel like you don't want to use the template, you want to write it yourself in your own structure, absolutely go for it. And I'm looking forward to reading all of them. So you can also use a website called Thesaurus, which is a highly effective website if you are struggling to think of other terms or other words that aren't as basic as, say, pale or scared. Okay, so if you type in scared on Thesaurus, it will come up with a whole range of other terms that you could use instead that might sound more sophisticated and might be more intriguing to the reader. Okay, so continue on with your letter and then swap it with a partner and proofread it. Thank you. So in terms of making adjustments for students with different learning abilities for the task, the inclusion of the scaffolded template could be quite beneficial for students who struggle with reading, writing, and comprehension. The scaffold provides the students with a structured template of how to structure a letter and also what information to include with writing prompts. So it provided the students with a sentence, and the students had to finish that sentence and provide various forms of language to describe what they have seen. So for example, Dracula's castle and Dracula himself. So having that scaffold, it provides an effective guide for students so that they don't have to try and figure out how to write a letter by themselves. It was also important because in many classes there are a lot of students who are quite proficient with writing and they don't require a scaffolded table to write a letter. So it's important to encourage them to practice independence and practice experimentation with writing. And that's what students can do at this task. So this sample here, this student created a different order with her letter to Mina. The student also was able to incorporate descriptive and emotive language and was highly effective in conveying a message of being scared and feeling helpless in this case. So the more proficient students can benefit greatly from a task like this, as they can practice their independence and creativity without the limits of a scaffold. But it's great to have both options there because classrooms are filled with a range of diverse learners with different abilities. So the samples that I have here could have some improvement. So with this scaffold here, some students could still struggle with this, and that's totally fine. I think in terms of the importance of emotive and descriptive language in this task, it's highly important and it has to be included in order to successfully complete the task. Some students don't have as large a vocabulary as others and wouldn't know how to incorporate such words into a task like this. So for one method of improvement, it may be worthwhile to create a word bank with definitions. So the teacher will provide a range of emotive words and a range of descriptive words that relate to the subject and provide a brief definition beside them so that the student can see that word and can think to themselves that would fit in with this sentence quite well. And then that's how they learn how to incorporate that language into such creative tasks or even tasks in the future like essays. So that might be beneficial to those learners. In terms of the students that didn't want to use the scaffold, it's important to practice creativity, but it's also important for teachers to set some boundaries and limits in terms of what they can include and what they can't include. So the teacher may want to provide a short guideline of what needs to be included in that creative piece, and then students are free to incorporate something else as long as they have stuck to those specific guidelines. So in terms of, for example, Jonathan's first visit to the castle, first encounter with Dracula, the first encounter with the lady in the carriage who gave him the crucifix, just as an example. Okay, so I have 2 student samples here from the letter writing Dracula task. This is the first sample here. As you can see, the student didn't use the standard template that was provided to the students. This student in particular is quite proficient with their writing compared to some of the other students in the class, so it is one of the stronger responses. There is some room for improvement, so the student uses repetitive language, some spelling and grammatical errors, but nonetheless it is one of the stronger responses of the class and contains emotive and descriptive language. The second sample isn't as strong as the first sample, so as you can see, the student used the actual template provided to the students, but the responses are quite vague and short. So for example, in the arriving to the castle section, the prompt is, Castle Dracula is imposing and dreadfully old, ... The student continued with, I thought it looked spooky because it was old, dark, and looked haunted. I did not want to go inside. So as you can see, the response is quite basic and it is short. The student didn't elaborate on that point and didn't use higher order descriptive language, and it may have been beneficial to include some emotive language there as well to convey how Jonathan is feeling. So, in terms of the feedback given, at the end of the task, when the students had finished their letter, they passed it to their peer, and their peer proofread the response for them and made suggestions. So the peers were looking for grammatical, spelling, and punctuation errors, and had the opportunity to make recommendations for the use of different terminology. So instead of a student saying Jonathan was scared, the student may rather say Jonathan was frightened. It's a more sophisticated way of writing. Once the students had proofread their peers' work, they handed in their work through Google Classroom, so digitally, and then the teacher had the opportunity to mark each individual writing task. What the teacher found was a common issue among all of the tasks was the use of repetitive language. So for example, in this sentence, it was quite old and looked almost unlived in. It looked quite haunted and uninviting. So the teacher made a recommendation for the use of more sophisticated language there, and also sentence structure. So the student may have the ability to merge some sentences together and use some connecting words there. In the weaker responses, the teacher asked the students to elaborate on certain points that they made and informed the students that their writing was too short. They needed to include some more descriptive language and more emotive language to convey how the writer was feeling. Okay? So through marking and collecting those student work samples, we were able to collect some valuable data from them. So we acknowledged some specific student writing trends that we could use as feedback for the next writing task, which may be creative or an essay. So one of them was the use of repetitive language, spelling, use of punctuation, and the use of emotive and descriptive language. Okay. In a classroom, there are a lot of students that come from quite diverse backgrounds and have different abilities. Another effective resource that could be provided to students would be audiobooks. So these students were writing this task on the basis of they collectively read chapter 1 and 2 of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Some students struggle to read by themselves and may not be able to refer back to the text. So it's important to provide the students with an audiobook of that text so that students can refer back to it, hear the language, hear how it's used, and be able to grab that and incorporate it within their own response.